My name is Jorge Partida. I'm chief of psychology for LA's Department of Mental Health, and we're been planning and working on building bridges to behavioral health, and very excited to create opportunities to bring the importance of behavioral health and the importance of creating careers in behavioral health for young people of color, particularly. As you know, there's great disparities in behavioral health, and more, there are less people that look like the communities that are more disproportionately impacted.
hmm
And so it's important that we recruit young people and allow young people to begin to see themselves as part of the future of behavioral health. It's important to utilize their lived experience. It's important to utilize their experience of culture and family and community to be able to bring about true and lasting change.
Yeah, and we've already reached out to some schools and we've gotten a great response from a lot of students, which has been really encouraging. Jorge, I want to hear, because you've written two amazing books, and Promise of the Fifth Son, you talk about your experience of wanting to get into this field and then kind of feeling not connected to it because you weren't seeing representation. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that my first sort of jarring experience came when I was a student and getting my doctorate. And, you learned about Freud and all of these folks that really kind of changed and created the experience of psychology. But the myths and teachings are really rooted in Greek mythology, narcissism and all of these other sort of myths that really fold into what we know as the diagnostic categories. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know that that necessarily represents my community, and I don't know that it necessarily represents the way that I grew up. And it just got me to think about, well, what is my tradition? And feeling always kind of apart from the majority as an immigrant. And as a man of color, I began to really kind of think about this idea of what do our ancestral roots say about who we are and how we see the world? This idea of the collective consciousness, of the notion that we are part of our past. And then it becomes important to really understand our past so that we know who we are and where we come from. And so I really, the other thing that you are aware of, Adam, is that I had a grandmother that was a curandera, a healer, and I'm her oldest grandchild. And so I really grew up with her as a significant part of my life. And so when I thought about what do I want to do with my life, I wanted to be like her. And so, I thought that I wanted to be a healer, but not a traditional doctor. And so psychology to me made sense that's kind of, medicine. It's healing, but it's not necessarily traditional. So that's really where my trajectory, where my interest in psychology really began. And today I still think we have a lot of work to do integrating ancestral medicine, medicine that empowers people in spaces that are more traditional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the numbers still, I mean, even probably from when you started to now, I think it's less than 10% as a whole are people of color in the mental health and behavioral health field. I think it's 5% are Black and African American, probably around the same Latino, and multiracial. I was really surprised. It's like 1% or even less.
Yeah. And when you think about, the higher education, doctors and all of that, the percentages get even smaller. And so it is important for us to think about, well, what's happening to our communities when, truth is often in the eye of the beholder. So we do know, for example, that students of color get disproportionately labeled as attention deficit at higher percentages. Black men and Black women get labeled as schizophrenic with a higher frequency, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of
overprescribed medications, in children especially,
over-institutionalized in jails, and so the impact is severe. And once that label is put upon a child or an adult, it's very difficult to remove that stigma from your background. And so it's something that oftentimes not only gets internalized by the person that's receiving a diagnosis, but it's also something that, everybody else in society begins to perceive the person as such. And there are a lot of experiments that demonstrate that impact. The Rosenthal effect and so many other experiments where, really once somebody is labeled, it gets very difficult for people to not see the person as a criminal or as mentally ill or whatever the ism is that really impacts somebody's ability to have a level playing field and to have an opportunity for advancement.
So especially working with young people, when they're ready to, oftentimes what I tell young people when they're really starting to take the healing journey and start doing the deep work is they're often the first people sometimes to ever address those generational traumas. In their families, right? So it's a huge task and undertaking. It takes a lot of spiritual and emotional wherewithal.
Yeah.
And if they're ready to step into that healing space and they have a bad experience with a practitioner or a therapist or a social worker, it could often set them outside and not want to even address healing because it's not for me and they don't know me. They don't recognize who I am, where I'm from. They're not my people. Talk about that interaction and how that sets someone up.
Well, and I think that this is also part of the challenge that we have in traditional behavioral health care in our communities is that it is part of the reason why we have such great discrepancies and inequities is people do show up in spaces and they're not seen. They're not treated well. They go into spaces that don't feel welcoming. And then they have an experience where they get pathologized and labeled. And so oftentimes they drop out of treatment at much higher frequencies and much higher rates than the general population. And typically what we do is we don't tend to blame the practice. We don't blame the system. We blame the victim. We say, well, they're not compliant with treatment and they're just not that interested. And so as a result, programs that really are culturally sensitive, linguistically available, get funded less and less because people show up less and less to receive that level of care. We just, through MHSA and other prevention funding from the state, we're going through a cycle where a lot of the funds are going to be cut for prevention and early intervention, and they're going to go into mandated treatment, forcing people to get treatment with the logic that we're taking people out of the streets. But the reality is that there's a huge population of folks that won't be reached at a lower level of care in preventative medicine and early intervention, and we're setting up people for again the huge for-profit institutionalized patterns of jail, of dropping out,
medicalization,
all of that. It starts to really create an industry that feeds upon the most vulnerable. So there's such a need for us to engage community in consciousness raising, in empowerment theory, and really get people to become aware of what's happening. That's I think oftentimes the first and the most difficult step, because so many of us are walking around with blindfolds on and not fully aware, or just feeling so helpless and hopeless because we've been hurt so often by these same systems that we just don't want to participate at all and we don't have anything to do with it. But what we have to remember is that it's not just an impact on our personal health. It's not just an impact on me. It's also the impact on multi-generational trauma. And so whatever it is that we don't take care of today, we're just assuring that the next generation is going to be burdened with the same impact, if not worse. And that's part of the escalation that we're seeing, is that we are not creating leadership. We're not creating mentorship. We're not creating an opportunity for those that are more awakened and are more aware and more empowered to really bring others along and say, collectively, as a society, we've got to realize what colonization, what racism, what oppression, and removal of medicine has done to our communities.
Yeah, Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries, beloved member of the LA community. He said, either you transform your trauma or you transmit it.
Yeah.
So
yes, and her, that we always hear that the quote, as corny as it may sound, that hurt people, and we are carrying around so much trauma, so much multi-generational pain, and we're not aware of it. We don't have the resources to really sit down and unpack this trauma and really release the impact of trauma on the physical, mental, and spiritual body. And so what we constantly do is, with everyone that we encounter, we pass that on and we pass that on. And so, we see it in greater rates of addiction. We see it in greater rates of violence. We see it in greater rates of imprisonment. We see it in greater rates of homelessness and severe mental illness. And it's a cycle that really is robbing us of future leaders. It's robbing us of our youth and our communities. I mean, just a blatant example is all the unaccompanied children that we saw removed from their parents. If you want to hit a community where it hurts, take their children away, take their future away, institutionalize them, get them removed from the family, and really watch what's going to happen to the next generation of those children being gone. And so it's a wound that keeps perpetuating itself. We see by the Surgeon General's report on the state of youth that our youth are in a worse situation now than they have been in generations past. And that's not the way it's supposed to be.
And that's financially, that's psychologically, that's educationally,
socially, in terms of relationships,
right?
Absolutely, academically, in terms of performance, you name it.
And a lot of people want to blame social media and the phones. Now, those contribute to symptoms, but they're not looking at the root cause of a sick society and a toxic culture, what Gabor Mate talks about.
Exactly. And how to begin to create pathways for healing that are accessible, that are economically viable, that are very doable. We don't necessarily need the traditional medical system to perpetuate the same the same pathways. There are alternative models out there that really rely on empowering community, on building leadership, on really creating a sense of ownership, instead of having these quote unquote evidence-based practices that are taught, that are brought in by research institutions and universities. And then they come in and they study an organization, they study a community, but never come back to the community to really talk about the impact of that research or what that research can really do to foster growth and leadership and ownership. And so it's a hemorrhaging when our community gets involved, but doesn't see the direct result of their involvement or doesn't see the direct impact on changing some of the abusive patterns that perpetually, generations are having to deal with.
Yeah. And, so just a little historical context. Back in the 80s, Reagan's the one who closed all the psychiatric units.
Yeah.
And where did all those people, there was no follow-up solution. They all went to the streets. And then what did they fill? Private prisons.
Yeah.
Right. So currently in America, the biggest mental health institutes are our prisons.
And Adam, I was actually in a very sweet spot to see that happen firsthand, because I was doing my residency actually at a state-operated hospital, Chicago Read, back in the day. And then at the same time, I was working at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, directing their behavioral health program. And I remember as an intern, as a psychology intern, the conversations around the closing of the institution with the logic. And here's the trick. The logic was, we are going to close the doors of the institution, send people back to the least restrictive setting in their communities, take the funding that we have for the hospitals and give it to community organizations so they can really take care of their own. What happens? The doors closed. That money never happens. It never trickles down to the community organizations. The community organizations are ill-prepared, ill-educated to really deal with the severity of the population. And boom, people drop out.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden we begin to see a rise in homelessness because folks really don't have access to long-term care that really is required for communities to feel that there is movement and that there is a sense of healing. There's a sense of movement. And so with those doors closed, with a lack of funding for programs, and with the lack of training of professionals to really deal with the population, the only option is the streets. And that's till this day, we still see the impact of that. It is, there are few professionals that have the relationship necessary to connect to people that are dealing with persistent mental illness and to really give them options for housing and for healthcare and for employment and for community integration that really do provide long-term solutions rather than just institutionalization, either in the streets or in the prisons.
Yeah, and we're talking about children too. I mean, we can talk about just the adults, but also, you know, we're the largest incarcerator of young people in the world. I think more than China and Russia combined, we have more young people locked up. And what does that do to a young person when they're when they need a healing environment, but they're thrown into a traumatic environment? And I've heard from a lot of people who've been in prison that said juvenile hall was more traumatic than prison was.
Yeah, juvenile hall is intense, and it starts early on. It starts even with our foster care system that is, you know, poorly staffed, poorly prepared to deal with the challenges, and poorly prepared to really reunify families and to provide families the interventions that are necessary to preserve children in their home and in their communities. And so it starts with that level of assimilation where you get kids put into correctional facilities that really are not intended to provide treatment and reintegration. And so they become grounds for educating folks and young people to become criminalized and to feed into the prison system. So yes, I've heard that too, that oftentimes it's the violence that happens in juvenile halls and the education that children are receiving about how to stay institutionalized and criminalized really does happen very early on. And so these environments are not always curative. They're not always empowering. They're not always providing the care that these young people need in order for them to be able to come back to society, be integrated, and really be productive and heal from the trauma that they're carrying.
Yeah. And just even walking through, I went through Camp Gonzales with one of my colleagues. And just the next day, I was really just shooken. Yeah. Because you walk into these facilities. So, and it's 12 to 18. So imagine being a 12-year-old and you're bunked next to a 17-year-old, right? They're all showering together. They're all in one room. You're away from your family. I mean, it's a horrible.
Lack of clinicians, and the clinicians that you have are scared of the population because you know they're concerned that they don't know how to deal with aggression, and they don't know how to deal with some of the behavioral problems. Yeah. And so as a result, you know, we are creating these institutions that really are polarizing. It's the professional against the youth, and instead of really creating spaces of healing, it is sort of fortifying the correctional system and the sort of prison industry that really does feed upon the difficulties that young people are having in these institutions.
Yeah. So back to the solution, right? We know the youth and the young people in the next generation are always the solution.
Yes.
Right? We have the ability to recognize the past, reflect on the present, but also know what needs to change. Yeah. So why is it important for us to bring in these young people of color, support them, mentor them, give them opportunities, get them internships, and set them up for careers? Because we also know 40% of people don't finish college when they enter, right? And especially if you're going into a field like this and you don't have any teachers or professors or counselors that look like you, and you're dealing with life when it happens nowadays, minute by minute, it's very easy to get discouraged and stop. And there's the financial concerns and all those things. So why now? Why is it important for us to be gathering these young people and supporting them?
Well, I think, you know, we have the data to demonstrate that young people are in dire need of intervention, more behavioral health issues, more mental health issues. The Surgeon General's report. There's so much information out there that really states that our young people are in a crisis. And so without a role model, without a mentor to really show you that there is a different pathway for you, it's very difficult for a young person who's involved in a traumatic situation and a traumatic environment to see a pathway different than the one they're in. And so mentorship really does provide a much needed corrective relationship that can demonstrate the possibilities of a different pathway. And we have to start, so the mentor relationship not only teaches young people that it is possible to do something, to have something different in your life, to attract something different, but a mentorship relationship also shows a young person how to do that. Mm-hmm. And it starts by the personal an individual healing relationship, because a lot of young people that are hurt are not even aware of the depth of their hurt. Mm-hmm. Or the likelihood is, as we know, when we get depressed and when we get anxious and we go into our trauma, what happens? We cut everything off. We cut relationships, we cut contact, we begin to isolate, and we begin to withdraw. And that's exactly what leads to oftentimes suicide attempts and, so much self-hurt and self-damage. And so what a mentorship relationship can begin to do is it can begin to not only fortify the young person to prevent that level of isolation, but it can also begin to give the young person an opportunity to self-reflect, to analyze, to observe. And we know that the only pathway out of trauma is you got to begin to have some insight into how much pain you're taking on. You've got to take some ownership, and you've got to take some reflective focus on yourself to be able to recognize, right? To accept that you are in a position of pain and suffering and that there is a different pathway. And unless we really have healthy, curative, peer mentorship relationships with young people, that possibility may not exist. It may not be visible. And so what we want to do is we want to create relationships, mentorship relationships with the young people to really demonstrate, hey, you're not alone. And I've done it. I've come from the environment where you've come from. I've, dealt with trauma. I've dealt with poverty. I've dealt with violence. I've dealt with all of these things. And I was able to make it out. And I can show you how I did it so that you can pass that knowledge on to somebody else who's hurting. And then collectively, we begin to really take responsibility for shifting the direction of where our communities are headed, right? Yeah. That we restore the idea of positive masculinity, that we restore the idea of community, that we restore the idea of love as being supportive, that we restore the idea that we're all connected and that we can be part of a solution, that we begin to take all that brain power that is lost in depression, anxiety, and mental illness and really convert it into a source of strength and a source of vitality that can really be reproduced and regenerated for our communities.
Yeah, not only have you done it, but you've also done it by incorporating your history, your ancestral knowledge. And also, there are great positive things from Western psychology and modern day therapy and medications and things like that. But we need to take a more holistic, historical approach. These modalities have been used for hundreds and if not thousands of years with great effectiveness, right? And we're even seeing now, modern psychology, obviously yoga and meditation, but psychedelics and just different things that have been used by indigenous practitioners and ancient cultures and African cultures for years because they're like, oh wait, there is actually legitimacy behind it.
Yeah.
But it's taken us a lot of years and a lot of suffering and a lot of influence by big pharma and medicalization to get to this point.
And it's taken the disillusionment of also traditional medical models and traditional practices to recognize that we need a different medicine. And all we need to look is what's happening in addiction medicine and trauma medicine is to recognize that the reason why alternative ancestral medicine is becoming more popular is because it's proven to be more effective. It's proven to really provide a different model of what's possible. And it's proven to really be an empowering model, not a pathologizing model.
Right.
It's an empowerment model that really shows you that part of the disease that happens to us is the disconnect. And so in ancestral medicine, a big focus of healing is restoration of the illusion of self into community.
That's right.
That you are a part of a greater community that needs you healthy, needs you to remember your purpose, needs you to remember what you're all about, and needs you to remember that you're not alone.
Right.
And that kind of reintegration is so powerful in healing, that it really does restore the balance of self, community, and purpose.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing you said, I mean, it's, again, the antithesis of our culture and our society and capitalism is individualism.
Yeah.
We need community, right? And I don't know if it was you or someone else, private practice.
Yeah.
Right? Going into a private practice, like with just one-on-one. We need each other to do this work.
We need each other. And we have to stop looking at private practice as a lucrative model. We need to recognize that there are other ways of engaging community. It really is about belonging, that it's really about giving back. It's really about purpose. It's really about generative connections that are going to last much longer than our individual lives, and that's a type of restorative healing that is so desperately needed. That whole idea of restoring community, when people talk about having somebody that's been mentally ill or that's been in prison or that's been homeless and reintegrating them into community, what community are you going to reintegrate them into if the community itself is suffering?
Right.
If the community itself is mistrusting of anybody coming in new. And so there's a way in which we have to heal community and create spaces of welcoming and create spaces of remembering who we are and what we are, so that we can begin to really reach out and take those folks that have been removed from our community and bring them back. Mm-hmm. But we have to really create a place of holding for them to be able to come back to.
Right. So back into the Bridges to Behavioral Health program, we were really trying to pilot and create and create a strong infrastructure in Los Angeles so it can continue and grow. So let's talk about some of the relationships and opportunities we've already created.
Sure. So we've been reaching out to community colleges, in part, obviously, because that is, that's an associate level entry point. And so we want to remind students that with an associate's, you can enter the behavioral health field as a community health worker. You can enter it as a peer specialist. And there are positions available in the county, whether it's with the Department of Mental Health, Department of Public Health, or other county departments, where these positions are vacant and looking to be filled with young people of color, particularly. So we have a need, we have the positions, and what we need to do is we need to link students to these entry-level positions. And I think the idea of not only developing relationships with community colleges and with high schools is to begin to plant those seeds of possibility in young minds, and
that they're needed,
and that they're currently vacant and available. And so it's not some sort of future endeavor that we're talking about. It's now. And I think that once we have community college students enter into behavioral health field and begin to have a living wage and begin to recognize that you can make a good living, that the idea is that they can begin to see maybe a master's in social work or a doctorate degree in psychology as a possibility, because not only will you be surrounded by community, but you'll begin to see other mentors and other folks that are able and have been able to create a career so that you see it as viable. And then also introduce, obviously, students to financial incentives and grants that are available to continue to do this work. The idea is also that as you heal, as you personally heal as a student, you recognize the value of that and want to give back to your community. And so it's really kind of, beneficial for the Department of Mental Health, for the Department of Public Health, for LA County to begin to see young people coming into the field and really foster long-term relationships, so that these relationships can then be the future of leadership for these departments that desperately need the experience and background of young people.
Yeah, no, we've already gotten a response from quite a few students, which has been great, and saying, I want to be part of it. Yes. And there's no programs at my school with people of color teaching me, and not there. Even my counselors provide some guidance, but when I graduate, I'm still kind of lost. Like that's an intimidating thing to really have a passion for something and also see people coming out, not getting jobs, not getting internships. So what we want to do is ensure they get internships,
Absolutely.
ensure they get jobs, and ensure they're supported all the way through until completion.
Absolutely. And part of that mentorship is that it's a mentorship that's connected to either a practicum experience, a volunteer experience, or a position of entry, so that it's a very tangible relationship that not only is going to benefit personally, but professionally is going to provide the platform for professional growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else?
Just that, we are very grateful for the reception that we've gotten from ELAC, East LA Community College, from
Antelope Valley,
from Long Beach Community College. So we're beginning to kind of build interest and momentum. There are specifically programs that are certified in either child development or psychology, social work that we really want to target, because those are the places where, there's already a student population. But if anybody's interested, really, you don't necessarily have to be in a behavioral health program to be able to participate in this mentorship opportunity.
One big major response I've heard from clinicians that are already practicing in the field, especially clinicians of color, is I would love to be a mentor. I wish I had this when I was younger.
Yeah.
So we know the need from the young people are there, but also the desire from professionals who have become successful want to provide that helping hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, the way that we move is that we recruit folks that want to be mentors, guide them through the process of what mentorship is and what we are looking for, introduce them to what we're looking for to connect with students, give them that background and the resources that they need. And then really in the community colleges and high schools is really help create a sort of a club type environment where we connect the mentors, and the mentors now have the training and ability to help facilitate that group so that the group becomes self-sustaining, right? And that the group then gets really connected to the mentorship relationship that can then lead to volunteer opportunities, practicum experience, and ultimately employment.
Yeah. That's great. Cool. Well, Jorge, make it happen, man.
Let's do it. Let's do it, man. Let's do it.
My name is Adam Steele. I'm founder of Grow Mentoring, and we just had an amazing conversation with Dr. Jorge Partida. We're going to be collaborating on this new program, this new mentorship program, the Bridges to Behavioral Health, where we're going to be supporting and empowering young people in our community, especially young people of color, to enter this field because they are needed. So we're excited to start this. We know it's only the beginning, and we look forward to you joining us. If you're a community member, a family member, a young person who wants to enter this field, a school, a community college, or a university, please reach out to us, and we look forward to the partnership.